Welcome to the Sleepy Historian, where boring history, storytelling, and ambient sounds, and the gentle rhythms of the past lull you into rest. This is not your typical history lecture. This is a soft-spoken history documentary designed to be boring history for sleep. The kind of calm bedtime storytelling that lets your mind drift gently into another time and then into dreams. Whether you're here for relaxing history to fall asleep to, a soothing backdrop while you unwind, or simply hear something gentle and immersive before bed, you've come to the right place. So settle in, dim the lights, sink into the quiet comfort of your space, and allow your thoughts to slow. Tonight, we step softly into royal chambers, into embroidered slippers and velvet-lined halls, but not in the way you might expect. Because while we often imagine royalty as a life of diamonds and destiny, the truth is, it was quite often dull, repetitive, deeply constrained, and surprisingly human. Our journey begins in Tudor England, in the shadow of Henry VIII, amidst the scent of beeswax polish and rosewater perfume, behind the guarded gates of a royal palace. The Queen's day was not filled with lavish feasts and endless romance, but with obligation, precision, ceremonial tedium, and long, careful hours filled with whispers, glances, and controlled appearances. In this sleepy story, we'll follow a day in the life of a Tudor queen. We'll walk with her from her morning rituals, with embroidered undergarments and silken sleeves, to her long stretches of silent embroidery and listening to court musicians she didn't choose. We'll linger in the cold stone corridors where secrets echo and watch as she navigates a day filled with duty, etiquette, and sometimes quiet loneliness. This is boring history in the best way, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary through stillness, detail, and time. We'll cover the daily rhythms and rituals of Tudor queens, a quiet portrait of one queen's true experience behind facade, forgotten royal artifacts and customs of the court, and finally, how queens' lives compare to the noble and peasant women outside the palace walls. Let the rhythm of calm bedtime storytelling ease you into the past. This is not drama. It's not scandal. It's not battle cries. It's warmth, ceremony, silence, and a hum of fabric being folded, pages being turned, and history breathing softly just out of sight. Let's begin. Imagine yourself in the cold stillness of dawn. Not modern dawn, but Tudor dawn, just before the sun spills across the slate roofs of a royal palace. There are no alarms, no coffee brewing, just a distant clink of metal clasps being fastened, the quiet rustle of linen, and the muffled voices of servants beginning their day. Somewhere, a fire is being stoked in preparation for the Queen's awakening. The Queen does not rise on her own. She is raised. Her day begins not with solitude, but with ceremony. At the first light, the lady of the bedchamber arrives, accompanied by a small team of women carefully selected from noble families, not simply for their loyalty, but also their ability to maintain the strict decorum of court. They move quietly, their slippered feet whispering against the stone floors. The air is faintly perfumed with rose oil, a scent meant to soothe the Queen as she emerges from sleep. There is no privacy here. The act of waking, stretching, dressing, all done in the presence of others. It is performance masked as routine. The Queen's hair is brushed slowly, 30, 40 strokes at a time. Her chemise, of the finest linen, is carefully pulled over her head. Her stays are laced, not tightly, but securely. The formality of structure, not the pain of fashion. Every layer has its meaning. First the kirtle, often quilted or padded for warmth. Then the gown, stiffened with farthingale hoops or boning, embroidered with tiny pearls or golden thread. And finally, the overgown, rich velvet, sometimes fur-lined, with sleeves so heavy they pull gently at her shoulders. Jewels are not chosen for vanity. They are symbolic. Sapphires for purity, rubies for passion, pearls for innocence. Even her shoes, often hidden beneath layers of fabric, are padded and lined, delicately hand-sewn by artisans who will never see her wear them. Breakfast is light and ceremonial. A small tray is brought to her, perhaps warm ale, a poached egg, soft bread with honey or preserves. She eats in silence, with her attendants standing nearby, not out of rudeness, but respect. Speaking before the queen does is a breach of protocol. Outside, the palace is waking. Courtiers begin moving through the halls. Pages polish silver. Kitchens clatter to life. But here, inside the queen's chamber, everything remains slow, hushed, deliberate. She will sit for a moment longer. A short prayer may be read aloud, often by a chaplain who enters, bows, and leaves again without a word. Or perhaps a musician will strum a quiet lute, the same melody she heard yesterday and the day before. It is not joyless. There is comfort in repetition, safety in structure. This world was shaped to hold her in place, not to entertain, but to define. And as the queen finally stands to begin the formalities of the day, a procession of meetings, greetings, and appearances, you begin to see. Her life is a tapestry of rituals, threaded together by duty, embroidered in silence. The morning now gives way to structure, not activity in the modern sense, but kind of refined choreography, where every gesture has meaning and every silence has weight. The queen does not walk the palace as she pleases. Her movements are scheduled, her appearances planned. She will be seen only when she is meant to be seen, and never by chance. A lady-in-waiting enters with the day roll, a document outlining every visitor, request, ceremony, and presentation that awaits. She reads it softly, as the queen listens while gazing out a narrow window, watching as the morning fog lifts from the garden hedges. Shortly after, it begins. First, a formal appearance in the great hall, not to speak, not to command, but simply to exist in view, to be seen, to represent continuity, grace, lineage, a living symbol of power that is always watched but rarely heard. You might imagine this as a scene of grandeur, but it is curiously quiet. The courtiers bow. The queen acknowledges them with the faintest nod. A rustle of velvet skirts follows her through the chamber. There are no hearty greetings, no spontaneous laughs, no interruptions. This is a space where silence speaks louder than words. Now come the audiences, small groups of nobles, petitioners, diplomats. Most are there for show. A few truly matter. And among them, the queen must discern what is spoken plainly and what is hidden between the lines. She listens. She gives brief, considered answers. Often, her words are chosen in advance by scribes and advisors. To speak too freely is to invite misstep. There may be a letter from a foreign court, brought in a velvet pouch, read aloud by a steward, sealed again, and tucked into a carved box for further discussion. Perhaps an ambassador delivers a gilded token, a gift that carries quiet political weight. It is a performance, but not a deceit, rather of containment. The queen is not allowed to feel. She is allowed to behave. And all the while, she sits upon a throne not meant for comfort, beneath a canopy not meant for shade, before a crowd not meant for joy. After this, there may be a walk to the gardens, but not alone. Always attended, always watched. You can imagine the weight of silence between her and the other noble women. Light words spoken, of fabric, of weather, of the latest poems circulating among the court, but never of longing, never of boredom, never of self. And then more appearances, more sitting, more nodding, perhaps reviewing an embroidery sampler, or watching a slow-moving performance by young musicians from a local parish. Even these diversions are part of the schedule, and none are chosen by her. If she smiles, it is graceful. If she sighs, it is silent. This part of the day stretches endlessly. Time moves strangely in a palace. Every moment is dressed in gold, but wrapped in protocol. Even meals, though elaborate, are ritual. She does not eat alone. The queen dines with select companions, serve in courses dictated by the hour, by season, and by rank. She will take measured bites, sip slowly. Her appetite is secondary to her image, and throughout it all, she is still being observed by servants, by advisors, by foreign eyes and future rumors. You may think at first that it will be thrilling to be queen, but imagine living every moment as a role, never quite as yourself. Not tragic, not cruel, just endlessly structured. And as the afternoon shadows begin to stretch across the stone tiles, the queen returns to her chamber, not for rest, but for the next ritual, still composed, still watched, still alone. The court grows quieter as the sun passes its height. The sounds of bustling attendants fade into the soft scuff of slippers and distant creaks of timber beams settling in the heat. This is a queen's private time, at least in theory, but even solitude for her is ceremonial. She returns to her chamber. The hearth has been restoked. Cushions have been fluffed. A tray of ink pots and parchment waits by the writing desk. Here, away from the performative spaces of court, the queen enters a different kind of duty. Letter writing is no simple task. Each letter must be carefully phrased, not only for its recipient, but for its future readers. Every missive might be copied, stored, or read aloud to others. The queen does not write her feelings. She writes her position. A message to a distant noblewoman may appear cordial, but each word holds layers. Favor, instruction, subtle reprimand. A reply to a suitor's ambassador must be diplomatic, even if it disguises annoyance or disinterest. And then there are the coded letters, the ones passed between queens and their spies, between sisters and advisors, cloaked in metaphor. These she may write with a trusted confidant nearby, a woman who knows when to stay silent and when to feign ignorance. Still, now and then, a sliver of truth escapes, in a turn of phrase, in a lingering stroke of the quill. These are only true glimpses of personal expression. Once the letters are sealed with wax, a maid collects them. They will be delivered under guard, but slowly. Travel takes days, sometimes weeks. In the meantime, the queen waits, outwardly serene, inwardly calculating. And then a moment of devotion. Every queen was expected to perform acts of piety. Whether she believed fervently or simply followed tradition, she would kneel, not on bare stone, but on an embroidered cushion before a small altar or prayer desk within her private chamber. The candle is lit. The room dims. Her voice is barely audible, just soft whispers of Latin psalms or English prayers. Her eyes may wander to the floor. Her thoughts may drift to the child she lost, or the king she barely knows, or the freedom she once imagined as a girl. Even devotion is a duty. The queen is a moral figure, a spiritual anchor. Her prayers are not her own. They are offered on behalf of the realm, for harvest, for peace, for heirs. And after prayer, perhaps a moment of embroidering or reading, if permitted. Some queens were taught Latin. Others were not allowed to read beyond scripture. Some kept books hidden behind thick tapestries, sharing romances and poetry among their women. Others read aloud from devotionals, with slow reverence. Then come the wardrobe changes. Yes, again, the formal gown of court is loosened, replaced with a softer robe. Still fine, still laced, but less rigid. Her hair, once pinned tightly, is now brushed loose, the heavy jeweled headdress removed and set carefully on its stand. You might expect this to be a moment of comfort, but even now there is an awareness, a hesitation, a pause before each gesture, because even here, even alone, she is rarely unobserved. A servant may be folding linens nearby. A guard may be posted behind a wooden screen. A lady-in-waiting may be pretending to nap in the corner. The queen cannot weep freely. She cannot sigh too loudly. She cannot remove the mask, even now. And so, as twilight sets in and the golden glow from the chamber windows fades into a gentle gray, she simply waits. Let us gently leave the candlelit chamber behind now and step backward in time, before the throne, before the titles, before the watchful eyes and whispering courtiers. There was a girl, one born not into simplicity, but into layers of expectation. No Tudor queen was born into anonymity. Whether she emerged from a powerful noble house or the fringes of foreign royalty, her childhood was a preparation for a life she could scarcely imagine. Imagine yourself in a great manor house. The scent of beeswax and old wood lingers in the corridors. The young girl, perhaps no more than 6, walks carefully across the flagstone floor, her small slippers making the faintest tapping sounds. Already, she speaks in full sentences with careful grace. Already, she has been taught when to curtsy and to whom. A nursemaid teaches her the Psalms in Latin. A tutor drills her in handwriting, posture, and the lineage of kings. She learns not just to read, but to read with purpose, scripture, etiquette manuals, and occasionally a copied poem if the household permits. And then there are lessons in behavior. She must not laugh too loudly. She must not eat too quickly. She must not run, even in the garden. Imagine that. A childhood shaped by restraint. Still, there's affection, but it, too, is careful. Her mother kisses her forehead, but always in the presence of others. Her father praises her embroidery, but never coddles her. There are moments of play, but always with a watchful chaperone nearby. From the age of 10 or so, she is made to observe the affairs of adults. She listens to counselors and clergy. She watches as letters are delivered and discussed. She begins to understand that her future is not hers to shape, but to accept. By adolescence, everything changes again. Now, she is trained to represent her family. Her wardrobe becomes elaborate. Her hair is styled daily. She speaks less often and listens more. And behind closed doors, her name may already be whispered among matchmakers, advisors, and kings. For the queen-to-be, marriage is not love. It is strategy. She may be promised to a prince she has never met, or to a widowed king twice her age. She may be sent abroad to live among strangers, learn a new language, adopt foreign customs. Or she may remain in England, surrounded by half-familiar faces, always aware that her alliances could shift with a single royal decree. But even as a teenager, she understands. Her worth is bound to her image, so she learns to walk slowly, to answer calmly, to smile without eagerness. At 15, she might already appear 30 in her composure, and yet she is still a girl, one who dreams of simpler things. Perhaps a private garden, or an hour alone with a book, or a warm loaf of bread, not shared at a ceremonial meal. The day of coronation, should it come, is not always a moment of triumph. It may follow tragedy. A queen may rise after the death of a sister, or the exile of a predecessor, or the failure of a rebellion. She may be beloved by some and despised by others before ever taking her seat on the throne. And yet she walks forward, not with joy, not with pride, but with the soft, measured grace she has practiced since her first curtsy as a child. The crown is placed upon her head, heavy, ornate, never truly comfortable. And in that moment, she ceases to be a daughter. She becomes symbol, figure, and prisoner of ceremony, all at once. Not quite herself anymore, and never quite alone again. By now, she wears a crown, but it is not made of gold alone. It is forged of alliances, of suspicion, of careful balance. For a Tudor queen, power is not only what one commands, but what one quietly endures. The queen is not a ruler, not in name, The king signs the orders. The council makes the laws. But within the shadows of that grand machine, she moves subtly, gracefully, purposefully. She begins her morning audiences, short meetings, some formal, some not. A minor noble requests favor for a cousin. A bishop seeks clarity on a matter of virtue. An envoy from France offers greetings and veiled questions. Each meeting is brief, cordial, and filled with undercurrents. The queen must be a diplomat. She must remember names, recall past conversations, detect motives without asking too much, and always, always offer nothing beyond what she intends. When she walks through the great halls, it is not as a woman passing by. It is a procession, even if there are no trumpets, no ceremony. Every move is watched. Every gesture may be recorded by someone. A servant, a visitor, a rival. Did she smile too warmly at Lord Seymour? Did she frown when the Chancellor bowed? Did she delay her step by half a breath at the chapel door? Even her silences have implications. And then, beyond the visible routines, there are letters, more than we saw before. Some addressed in delicate hand to family. Some in cipher, for allies across the channel. Some burned before they could ever be read aloud. For the queen may have no council seat, but she may have influence, in whispered words to the king, in quiet reassurances to a nervous advisor, in selecting a tutor, a priest, or a lady-in-waiting. She cannot decree, but she can suggest, and she chooses her moments with infinite care. Now and then, a scandal blooms. Perhaps a maid saw too much. Perhaps a courtier spoke too freely after wine. Perhaps a letter fell into the wrong hands. The queen does not storm. She does not accuse. Instead, she waits. She listens. She lets others talk. Then she acts, not with punishments, but with replacements. A lady-in-waiting is suddenly reassigned. A favored servant is promoted. A controversial visitor is sent back to his estate for rest. No one speaks of it openly, but the message is clear. The queen sees and remembers, and still there are private wounds. Sometimes the king favors another, a court beauty, a foreign ambassador's daughter. The queen must smile, must offer blessings, must continue with ceremony, even as rumors collect like dust in the corners of her chamber. Sometimes she loses a pregnancy. There are no announcements, only a few quiet tears, a change in fabric at the waistline, a whispered prayer beside a cushion that smells faintly of lavender and loss. Sometimes her brother dies in battle, and she must wear black with grace. And yet within all this, she finds spaces of resilience, in a glance toward a trusted advisor, in a midnight walk through the palace gardens, in a single page of a hidden book, read slowly by candlelight. This is the queen at her most powerful, not in her command, but in her composure, not in speeches, but in her ability to listen, not in wrath, but in her stillness. So far, we've glimpsed her rise and the ways she wielded soft power. Now, let's retreat deeper, beyond the throne room, past the guarded corridors, into her private world. Because even for a queen, there was a world behind the curtain, a space where rituals of state gave way to rituals of self, where her duties did not vanish, but changed their form. It begins with dressing, not a casual act, not a matter of preference, but a daily ceremony, attended by a small group of ladies-in-waiting, each with a precise role. One lifts the linen shift, one fastens the stays, one arranges the gown, one selects the appropriate jewelry, modest or lavish, depending on the hour. There are no mirrors. Her face, her posture, her entire presence must be arranged by memory, guidance, and the watchful gaze of others. The fabrics are thick, heavy brocade, layered velvet, embroidered silk. Everything binds, everything shapes, and yet she wears it all with practiced serenity. Once dressed, she sits for morning devotionals. A psalter open before her. A candle flickers, casting warm light on the page. Her voice is low, nearly inaudible, a murmur of Latin verse. Then comes a small council, not of governance, but of domestic affairs, which guests will be invited to dine. What arrangements are required for the evening chamber music? Has the tapestry from Bruges arrived for the winter room? These details matter, for the Queen's household reflects the realm. Clean floors, polite servants, fresh linens, they are symbols just as much as seals and scepters. And when court is not in session, when the king is away, or matters of state lie quiet, a quieter life unfolds. She might walk the gardens. Imagine her there, under a high Tudor arch, stepping lightly between herb beds and rose bushes. The scent of thyme and crushed sage hangs in the air. Her fingers trail along the stone edge of a sundial. Or she might spend the afternoon embroidering, not just as pastime, but performance, a skill expected, a symbol of virtue, threading scenes of saints, flowers, and allegorical animals. Sometimes she reads, but never aloud. A woman reading alone is considered private, even rebellious. She may choose a collection of poetry, a treatise on herbal medicine, a devotional tract, and sometimes a forbidden text hidden within a permitted cover. She writes letters, many, to her family, to foreign queens, to abbots, bishops, orphan cousins, widowed friends. Letters filled with formal phrases, but buried between the lines. Hints of weariness, glimpses of wit, signs of affection carefully veiled. And in the evening, there may be music, a lute plucked softly, a court singer offering gentle songs in French or Italian. She listens, not for performance, but for peace, for the rhythms of melody that remind her of childhood or long-lost summers, or simply the passing of time. Or there may be nothing, just silence. She may sit beside a window, one pane slightly open, letting the cool night air, the flicker of a distant torch outside, the scent of damp stone, her fingers resting quietly in her lap. Here, in the stillness, she is not a queen, not a symbol, not a wife, not a figurehead. She is simply a woman, alone with her thoughts, worn with ceremony, draped in silence, still, and then footsteps, a knock, the day resumes. Now, let us quietly open a different kind of door, not at chambers or corridors, but to the symbolic world of a Tudor queen, a world stitched with signs, draped in metaphor, and written in language not always meant to be read. Because the world of court was not only about what was said, but what was hinted at, embroidered, painted, and inscribed in silence. Imagine entering the Queen's private chapel. At first glance, it is a place of worship. But look closer. The pattern on the kneeling cushion? A vine of red and white roses. York and Lancaster, symbolizing unity. The stained glass in the apse? A pelican pricking its own breast. An ancient emblem of sacrifice, long associated with Christ and maternal devotion. Even her Book of Hours, the small prayer book she carries, is filled with more than scripture. Margins edged in painted ivy, small birds, a fox clutching a scroll. Every image, every initial, has meaning, not always clear, not always innocent. Tudor courts love symbols. The more layered, the better. And queens, in particular, became fluent in this visual language. A swan embroidered on a sleeve was not just a swan. It meant loyalty, or sometimes silence. A bunch of grapes might suggest fertility. A unicorn, purity, or danger, depending on the pose. And then the jewels, brooches in the shape of anchors. Pendants shaped like open books or golden arrows, each one carefully chosen. each one worn at just the right moment, when a visitor was watching, when a message needed to be sent. Think of a queen wearing a gold locket carved with ship in stormy seas on the day her husband departs for France, or a sapphire ring in the shape of a coiled serpent just after rumors spread of betrayal. Her choices were not ornaments. They were utterances, spoken without sound. Even her handwriting carried clues. Some queens wrote in delicate italic script, modern, elegant, continental. Others use a firmer Gothic style, echoing tradition, strength, and heritage. Occasionally, a note will be written in French or Latin, or in a cipher shared only with one other person. Love letters disguised as diplomatic memos. Political warnings veiled as spiritual advice. A queen's pen was sharp, even when dipped in ink. There were also gifts laden with meaning. A set of gloves perfumed with rose water, a sign of forgiveness. A carved comb for reconciliation. A needle case to suggest industrious virtue. And the tapestries, oh, the tapestries, hung in private chambers, often unseen by the public, filled with mythic scenes. Diana bathing, watched from behind a tree. A lion bowing to a maiden. A unicorn slain, then reborn. These were not merely decorations, but personal mirrors. Quiet reflections of love, ambition, grief, or secret hope. Some even believed in omens. A crown that sat askew in a dream. A flickering candle extinguished at the wrong moment. A mirror that cracked without cause. Queens were not free from superstition. Many had their own talismans. Rings set with protective stones, scraps of scripture folded in pouches, charms sewn into their hems by loyal servants or old nursemaids. All part of a quiet, symbolic defense against betrayal, against illness, against loneliness. Theirs was a world where meaning lived between the lines, where nothing was said outright, but everything was understood. This world cannot be excavated with shovels, only with quiet attention, only with stillness, only with sleep-soft curiosity and the kind of listening that does not strain, but simply rests. Now that we've wandered through the symbolic language of Tudor queens, their silent expression sewn into sleeves and carved into lockets, let us linger a little longer in the world of ritual and belief. Because while much of a queen's life was public, formal, and political, her spiritual world was something far more personal, and often much more mysterious. Imagine a small, private altar behind a velvet curtain. The queen kneels there, hands folded, eyes closed, but she is not praying with the court's chaplain or the loud Latin chants of Westminster Abbey. She is whispering her own prayers, lighting her own candles, speaking directly to saints long faded from memory. In Tudor England, faith was deeply woven into the everyday, but it was also in turmoil. The Reformation swept through, cracking open centuries of tradition, splitting allegiances, and reshaping what people believed. For queens, this meant walking a delicate line between devotion and diplomacy. Take Catherine of Aragon, fiercely Catholic, kneeling in front of a carved crucifix, whispering the rosary in Spanish beneath her breath. She carried a small bone relic said to belong to St. Agnes, hidden in a locket shaped like a heart, now picture and bullion. She, too, was devout, but her faith tilted toward reform. Scripture in English, prayers spoken plainly. Her Bible bore her initials, painted in gold leaf. She had a copy of Tyndale's translation, long banned by the church. Dangerous, even deadly, to own. Yet still, she wore a pendant, an ornate A, with pearl drop hanging from it like a tear. Queens were expected to be the pious heart of the nation, but their personal beliefs were often more complex, sometimes even contradictory. In their chambers, they kept relics, fragments of saints' bones, slivers of the true cross, tiny ampoules of holy water. These were objects of comfort and protection. not for show, but for secret use. Some even consulted astrologers. Queen Elizabeth I had Dr. John Dee, a man who studied stars, spirits, and strange symbols. He charted horoscopes, cast predictions, and whispered advice on auspicious dates. Elizabeth trusted him, not just for politics, but for the rhythms of the cosmos. Other queens kept small charms tucked in shoes, rings engraved with protective inscriptions, girdles with prayers sewn into the inner lining, close to the skin, not spoken of openly, but always worn. Even the rituals of mourning held sacred, secret power. When a queen lost a child or a parent or a favored lady, she would retreat behind closed doors. Black veils, black ribbons, black ink. For 40 days or more, she might not be seen. But behind those drapes, the rituals continued. Candles lit, masses offered, bread given to the poor, and always silence. These practices were as much for the living as for the dead, a way to hold grief safely, to bind it up in structured softness. The queen might wear a mourning jewel, a small locket with miniature painting inside, or a curl of hair, or a single pressed flower, not to show the court, but to carry with her, always. Some queens kept dream journals, parchment books with soft leather covers, where dreams were recorded not as fantasies, but as omens. A blackbird flying east, a river running dry, a wedding veil torn, even the seemingly mundane, the arrangement of candles, the placement of a chair, the time of waking, could carry significance. Patterns meant protection. Repetition meant order. These were not superstitions in the modern sense. They were quiet structures in a chaotic world. So imagine the queen again, returning to her private space after a long day of courtly duties. She removes her crown, loosens her sleeves, washes her hands in rose water, lights a single candle. She reaches into a carved box, takes out a prayer card, its edges worn. She kneels, not for the court, not for the people, but for herself, for her own soul, for her secrets, for the weight she alone carries. You are not watching this. You are only imagining it as you drift further into the soft, slow rhythm of boring history for sleep. Now that we've quietly wandered through the symbols, rituals, and sacred habits of Tudor queens, let us slip gently into the final corner of this segment, into the private spaces where their most personal lives unfolded and where time itself seems to settle into dust. These were not the grand halls of state, nor the echoing galleries painted with power. These were small rooms, quiet corners, secret alcoves, rooms that smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax, or sometimes of parchment and wool, rooms with worn cushions and polished wood, and the whisper of gowns brushing the floor. Let us imagine a queen's withdrawing chamber. It is not quite a bedroom. It is not quite an office. It is a middle space, a space for thought, for writing, for listening. A low fire burns in the hearth. A cat curls in the corner. On a side table, a small mirror sits in an inlaid frame, not for vanity, but for reflection. Here, the queen might write letters, personal ones, in her own hand, to her mother, her childhood nurse, a friend sent away in marriage to France. The script is tight and slanted, the ink slightly smudged. On some pages, a drop of wax seals the paper, pressed with a ring. There might also be music in this room, a small virginal or a lute or a psaltery, delicate instruments designed for private pleasure. She may play softly to herself in the evenings, or listen while a lady-in-waiting gently plucks a tune. These were the moments when the mask of queenship loosened, when duty gave way briefly to memory. And so, in these spaces, we sometimes find the most forgotten things. A worn book with pages turned down, a small pin cushion in the shape of a bird, a bundle of dried herbs, thyme, rosemary, bay, tied in linen and tucked near the window to ward off illness and insects. Sometimes personal portraits too, not the grand oil paintings meant for display, but tiny ones, miniatures no larger than a palm, painted in enamel, worn in lockets, or folded into boxes. Often they were people loved and lost. These rooms were also places for craft. Queens embroidered, not always elaborate tapestries or state garments, but small things, handkerchiefs, altar cloths, sleeves, sometimes just as a way to pass the time. Other times, as a kind of silent prayer stitched into fabric. The queen scent would linger here, rose, violet, sometimes clove or sage. It clung to her gloves, her hairbrush, the linen cloth folded over her chair. All of it part of her, this queen who was not only monarch, but woman in memory and solitude. Servants rarely entered without being summoned. It was understood, not spoken, but known, that this room was the queen's refuge. Here, she could cry. Here, she could remember. Here, she could simply sit. Even historians rarely find these rooms mentioned in letters or inventories. They are glimpsed only in fragments. A cushion described in passing, a broken comb, a list of items packed for a journey, one small mirror, 2 wax candles, a hand-sized book of devotions. And yet these objects, humble domestic, carry the deepest echoes, because they are not about power. They are about presence. The quiet presence of a woman who, for a few brief hours, was not queen or wife or mother or hostage to politics, but simply herself. No titles, no court, just breath and time. And so when you drift asleep tonight, know that these rooms, these soft, sunlit corners of history, still live, if only in imagination. They ask nothing of you. They wait, like old friends, as we leave the private spaces of a Tudor queen and slowly return to the wider world she governed. Let us shift our view, not forward, but outward. Because to truly understand a queen's world, we must contrast it with the lives of those who served her, saw her, and stood far beneath her in rank. We are entering the realm of comparisons now, a quiet study in contrast. Let's begin with something simple: bread. The queen, like all her court, ate manchet bread, soft, white, fine milled loaves baked from the best sifted wheat. The crusts were delicate, the interior pale and fluffy. This was not everyday fare for the common folk. In contrast, the average villager in Tudor England might chew on a much darker, rougher maslin, a coarse mix of rye and wheat. It was denser, heavier, and tasted faintly of earth and grit. Sometimes, in poor harvest years, this bread was stretched with beans or ground acorns, anything to make it last. Now, let's move from the dining table to bathtub, or rather, the absence of one. A Tudor queen had access to perfumed bathing chambers, with steaming basins of rose water, clean linens, and ladies to help her bathe. Water was heated by fire, poured into silver basins or polished wooden tubs. She might be gently scrubbed with cloths soaked in herbs, lavender, chamomile, or thyme. Most common people, they bathed rarely, not for lack of desire, but because of infrastructure. Heating water took time. Baths were shared. Soap was coarse, made from lye and ash. Cleanliness was a luxury, and warmth, in winter, an act of courage. Now imagine clothing. The queen's gowns, layer upon layer, were tailored to measure. Rich velvets, heavy damasks, cloth of gold. Imported silks embroidered with thread spun from real silver. Her undergarments were laundered daily. Her shoes were lined with fur. Even her sleeves had separate linings, changed with the weather. And yet, those same sleeves might be touched, brushed in passing, by a servant who owned only one pair of shoes passed down from a sibling, who washed her shift once a month, if lucky, who mended the same woolen kirtle again and again until the fabric thinned to threadbare transparency. Queens were not immune to hardship, but they were cushioned, literally and figuratively, from most of it. Their beds were not just larger. They were canopied, with mattresses stuffed with goose feathers and hung with velvet drapes. Their pillows were soft, their sheets smooth. Compare that to a straw-filled mattress shared by a farmer's entire family, or a servant sleeping in the kitchen near the embers. In medicine, too, the divide was stark. Queens had physicians, men trained, often inconsistently, in Galenic theory, astrology, and humoral balance. They had access to imported remedies, ground pearls, powdered unicorn horn, often just gnarled tusk, rose syrup, and cinnamon oil. The poor relied on local herbalists, midwives, and folklore. Treatments involved mashed onions for infection, or cold river stones to reduce swelling. The queen might sip warmed wine infused with cloves. A villager might chew tree bark. Even in language, the differences were clear. The queen might speak Latin, French, and courtly English, a cultivated dialect shaped by diplomacy and poetry. The villager spoke a rougher, earthier English, filled with local idioms, harsh consonants, and words that rarely appeared in scroll or sermon. They lived in different worlds, even if separated by only a few fields or walls. And yet, here's the quiet truth. Many queens remembered those fields. Some had come from them, and Bullen was raised in relative comfort. But her roots were not royal. Elizabeth Woodville, wife of Edward IV, had once stood barefoot in the woods as a commoner's daughter. And even those born to crowns carried echoes of the outside world. They were pampered, yes, but not always protected. The court was a place of luxury, but also surveillance, pressure, and expectation. Their privileges did not guarantee joy. So as you settle into your own soft bed tonight, consider this. You likely sleep warmer than a Tudor farmer, cleaner than a Tudor servant, and perhaps, freer than a Tudor queen, because while she had gold and pearls, you may have something far rarer in her world. Privacy, peace, and the freedom to close your eyes without the weight of a realm on your shoulders. And that, dear listener, is the kind of contrast that only boring history for sleep can gently uncover. Now that we compared the daily comforts of Tudor queens with those of commoners, let us turn our gaze even further back, to the beginning of their lives, to the childhood of queens, because royalty, even as infants, were raised in worlds entirely different from the ones you and I know, not simply in luxury, but in expectation, ritual, and distance, from parents, from peers, and often from tenderness. Imagine, if you will, the earliest memories of a Tudor queen, not of toys or playgrounds, but being swaddled in brocade, of nurses whispering in Latin, of meals eaten in silence, of lessons begun before the mind could grasp their meaning. A royal child's life was carefully orchestrated. She would not have woken to her mother's arms. Instead, she awakened to the gentle murmurs of a nursemaid, or the rustling of linen curtains drawn open by a chamberer. She was washed, dressed, and presented not for affection, but for inspection. From the moment she could walk, she was being watched, observed for posture, for obedience, for grace. Every glance, every motion, every word evaluated. While the children of villagers played with sticks in the mud or helped chase chickens, the royal girl was sitting straight at a polished desk, copying Latin prayers or practicing her French conjugations. Even play was measured: a lute, a carved puzzle, an embroidery hoop. By the age of 7, a future queen might know how to curtsy to ambassadors, walk without swaying, and speak of gods with practiced solemnity. But what she learned, truly, what made her different, was not just etiquette or education. It was how to endure performance. She learned that her smile was diplomacy, that her silence was safety, that her beauty was a kind of currency, and that her words could carry danger. She learned that her body might one day become a treaty. These were lessons never taught to the daughters of brewers or bakers. Let's peek into her schoolroom. The windows are tall, but the glass is cloudy. A master of Greek recites from a book. She listens, bored or focused, It makes no difference. She must nod, must repeat, must not forget. A second tutor waits to drill her in catechism, a third to refine her needlework. And yet, amid the rigor, she might still find moments of escape, tracing shapes in the condensation on the window pane, humming a tune under her breath, listening to the distant call of a dove and imagining it flying far beyond the garden walls. She may receive gifts, a book, a miniature painting, a carved wooden horse, but these are not toys. They are symbols of duty, of virtue, of expectation. And while she learns scripture and courtly manners, she also learns something quieter, how to observe. She watches her elders, her mother's silence at the king's anger, her sister's carefully phrased words, her father's advisors bowing too low. She begins to understand power, not as something wielded, but as something survived. A peasant girl might learn to tend a fire, to milk a goat, to mend a ham. A princess learns how not to flinch when men argue over her fate in front of her. This is not to say her life was joyless. There were laughs with maids, tickle fights with siblings, pastry stolen from platters, and songs hummed in secret. But even these came with awareness. Someone was always watching, and one day she might be queen. And so, by the time she reached adolescence, she was not just educated. She was crafted into a mirror reflecting her dynasty's ideals. She had learned that emotion must be restrained, appetite must be concealed, and curiosity must be shaped into diplomacy. That love might be a duty, and duty a kind of loneliness. Yet she bore it, not with sadness, but with quiet readiness, because to be royal was not a gift. It was a role, a lifelong script, and she knew hers by heart. And now, as our slow journey nears its end, let us spend time in one last chamber, one most never entered, though it shaped everything. This is not a room with tapestries or velvet cushions. It is the inner room of a Tudor queen's mind, the hidden place where the crown sits not on her head, but on her thoughts. To outsiders, a queen sparkled. She stood still while artists painted her likeness. She processed through flower-strewn streets. She waved from balconies, gave prayers at altars, and sat, poised, at long tables, with goblets of silver near her hand. But beneath the jewels and ceremony, there was pressure, a quiet, constant, inescapable pressure. Being queen wasn't a daily parade of silks and sonnets. It was a state of vigilance, a life of balance, of knowing that one careless word could shift alliances, that a misread glance could invite rumors, that a moment of grief, shown too openly, could be seen as weakness. Imagine beginning your day knowing that your smile is strategy, that every time you speak, dozens of ears are listening for meaning, for favor, for error. Queens had to think in layers, not just of fabric, but of meaning. When she accepted a gift, she weighed the politics behind it. When she greeted a noble's wife, she calculated loyalty. Even when she chose a color to wear, it was considered blue for virtue, red for power, black for dignity, white for piety. It might seem a life of control, but in truth, it was often a life of constraint. The queen did not own herself, not entirely. Her schedule was managed by courtiers. Her pregnancies were observed by midwives and noble women. Her meals were selected, tasted, approved. Even her words in public might be written for her by someone else. She lived surrounded, but often lonely. Even her ladies in waiting, her closest companions, were not equals. They were eyes and ears for their families. They laughed with her, but also reported her moods to others. Trust was never unbroken. Affection was always calculated. Even love, if she found it, was not hers to declare. Some queens had affection in their marriages. Others did not. Some were political pawns. Some were replaced, betrayed, or executed. Even in peace, she lived in the shadow of court politics, a game played mostly by men. So why did she endure it? Because there was something else within the queen, something forged in the long hours of girlhood training, the silence of embroidered afternoons, the stillness of state ceremonies. There was discipline, a kind of resilience that doesn't shout or shine, but simply endures. She knew the price of her crown, and she wore it anyway. Let's imagine one final scene. It is late. The queen is alone in her chamber. The torches have been extinguished one by one. A single candle flickers on a table beside her. Her wig has been removed, her heavy sleeves untied. The air is still. She is not performing now. No audience, no mirror, no scroll to sign, no smile to fake. And perhaps, just perhaps, she lets her shoulders slump. She sighs, not dramatically, just softly, not from sorrow, but from the weight of being seen for so long. In this moment, she is not a monarch. She is simply tired, and in that tiredness, she is human. And it is here, dear listener, that we quietly leave her, not as a symbol, not as a sovereign, but as a woman with burdens we may never fully understand. And as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts begin to drift, remember, even the most adorned lives are full of silence, routine, uncertainty, and longing. Even queen. And so, dear listener, we've reached the end of this slow, candlelit walk through boring history for sleep. Through shadowed corridors and sunlit courtyards, we wandered alongside a Tudor queen. Not the one on coins or in paintings, but the quieter version. The one who lived her life not only for her people, but for a role she never asked for. The one who stood still so history could watch her move. You've now glimpsed not just her rituals and riches, but her silences, her childhood, her careful words and practiced smiles, her loneliness, and perhaps, if your eyes are heavy now, her hidden humanity has gently followed you into dreams. At Sleepy Historian, we believe that the past isn't always loud. Sometimes, the quietest corners of time hold the softest truths. And here in this space, we celebrate those truths. We offer you soft-spoken history documentaries, bedtime relaxation, and gentle, ambient storytelling. A place where facts drift by like clouds, where archaeology, ritual, and culture are whispered, not shouted, where falling asleep to boring history is not just welcome, it's the whole point. As your breath slows, as your thoughts loosen their grip, remember, royalty, even in all its grandeur, still new routine, still new repetition, still new uncertainty and waiting and the quiet ache of responsibility. The Tudor queen you met tonight was many things, noble, studied, poised. But she was also tired, sometimes, and thoughtful, and human, just like you. So let the weight of the crown dissolve with the ticking of the clock. Let the gold of her gown blur into the haze behind your eyelids. And let yourself rest, knowing that even the most revered figures in history eventually laid down their heads. You listen to the Sleepy Historian, where the past hums gently in your ears, lulling you not with battles or kings, but with patterns, footsteps, flickering torches, and softly spoken stories. Good night. Dreamer of the distant past. Sleep well.